Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Amber Troop with Mentor Michigan, and we're excited to have all of you join us today for this exciting topic on collective impact. I'm joined today by two fantastic presenters and panelists for today's topic. First, Robin Lynn Grinnell. She's the Vice President for Donor and Community Relations at the Capital Region Community Foundation in the Lansing area. Good morning, Robin.
Good morning.
And Robin's no stranger to the nonprofit sector and has been in the field for quite some time and has been engaged in Mentor Michigan over the years in a number of different roles that she's served in the nonprofit sector. So she may be a familiar name and voice to you as you're listening into today's webinar. I'm also joined by Phil Knight. He's the Executive Director of the Michigan Capital Region Big Brothers Big Sisters. Good morning, Phil.
Good morning, Amber.
And Phil's joining us today because Phil has worked with Robin. So we have a mentoring program and a funder that have some experience in piloting some work around collective impact. So they'll be walking us through this topic, introducing you to collective impact and helping us understand what it means to those of us in the mentoring field and how you can get involved potentially with collective impact in your communities. We hope that you can be engaged and participate in today's webinar through questions and comments to the presenters as well. So all of you will be muted just for the sake of maintaining lots of background noise. But if you do have questions that you'd like to ask through the audio feature, please feel free to raise your hand on the GoToMeeting webinar control panel. If you click the little hand, the little high five, I'll know you have a question, and when we have a pause in the presentation, I will unmute you and allow you to ask your question. Or if you'd prefer, as we go along, feel free to type in questions in the questions box or the chat box, and I can ask them of our presenters, Phil and Robin, throughout the presentation as well. So don't hesitate to ask questions or make some comments on the presentation as we go along. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Robin.
Good morning, everyone. I apologize. I did not mute my phone this morning. There we go. All right. Thank you for joining us. I am really grateful to Amber to be able to talk to you this morning. This topic of collective impact is something that we've been really engaged in here at our community foundation. And as you'll hear from Phil a little bit later, kind of mucking it through with some of our grantees. Collective impact is a new topic in some ways, but it's something that I think all organizations need to think about from the context of, is this model right for us? And if the answer is yes, what will it take us to get there? And if the answer is no to the full formal model, then what can you learn from what other organizations are doing that might help strengthen your local initiatives? So we have several slides that we'll flip through this morning. We'll ask Phil to interject. Certainly, if any of you have experiences that you'd like to share, please raise your hand as Amber indicated or type something into the chat box. And then we'll really try to save some time at the end for some questions and some interaction. I know webinar is a convenient form of technology, but I can't see the look of confusion on your face or if you're drifting off or multitasking. So if you have a question, please definitely let us know. See if this works for us. All right, so the first thing I'd like to talk about is really the topic at hand. People, when they speak about collective impact, they're not always speaking the same language. Collective impact, or as some folks call it, the capital C, capital I version, is a very formal framework. It's been measured, it's been tested for a decade, and there have been several articles published about the whole framework that we're going to email to you after the webinar today. The real leaders in this field are the Strive Network in Ohio and their partners FSG, which is a consulting firm, and the articles have been published by the Stanford Social Innovation Review. So on the next page, you'll see the actual titles of those articles if you lose the links or something, or if you want to share this with folks later, and some links to their websites as well. But when we talk about collective impact, it's important for you to clarify with your community partners, what is it that they're looking for? Are they looking for this formal, somewhat prescriptive framework, or are they talking about collective impact in the notion of collaboration and a couple of good programs getting together and doing things together? They're very different beasts, and both are important and both can be impactful. But as you're working with funders, as you're talking with perhaps some other partners, it's really important to clarify up front. So that's really the crux of our conversation today. First, we're going to explore the formalized framework, and then we'll talk about the more general practices of collaboration and partnership and strategic alignment, and what we've learned, and what are some similarities, but what are the key differences between the two approaches. So this is just, again, the titles of the articles that you'll be receiving afterwards. If you're interested, you can visit either the FSG website or the Strive Network website. These two organizations have worked very closely in the field of collective impact, and they've kind of separated out the work now nationally. So if you're interested in collective impact, the formal framework related to education and education outcomes, Strive Network becomes your consultant for that. If you have community partners that are interested in the environment or economic development, community development, anything like that, the arts, FSG is the expert in all other areas besides education. So they've just kind of split up the playing field that way. One of the things when folks are talking about collective impact in the capital C, capital I model, one thing they really emphasize strongly is that this is not just another model of collaboration. This is something that is an intentional process. You commit to very specific activities for a specific purpose. And they kind of demonstrate different models in which organizations sometimes work or communities work. So right now, we're talking about the topic of mentoring, and we're looking at impacts on youth. So in your community or in your region, you may have several different organizations currently that are working in individual action mode. So they've all got their own specific measures, they've got their own defined audiences, they've got their own volunteers, they're collecting all their own data, telling their own story, and they can tell you their impact on a specific individual. We helped Johnny raise his reading level a full grade in this year. Or we helped this youth avoid these kind of risky behaviors because a caring adult was in their life. You know the things you measure, but it's largely focused on individual action. That's how our programs start. Sometimes we move into the phase of coordinated action. So you may say 3 mentoring programs in town all want to address a common issue. Maybe you want to reduce incidents where students are being referred to the juvenile justice system, or maybe you want to increase the number of days that students are actually attending school. So a number of your groups would get together and you'd find one common issue, one common measure, maybe a couple measures. You'd share some program data so that you were not perhaps duplicating counts, that you were clear on what schools you were working with and how you were measuring. And then you would do some collaboration. You talk about your best practices. Maybe one group is really good at training the volunteers. Maybe another group has a really good data management system that they now open up to the partners. But you coordinate. You still don't merge your organizations. You don't align outside of this particular program, but you're coordinating. And now you'll see these arrows. You're all kind of going in the same direction. But they're still scattered. There's some differences. This is where most of our collaboration falls, is in this coordinated action framework. And a lot of good things can happen here. We don't want to dismiss the work. But what the collaborative action mode, in the way that the collective impact folks talk about it, is this final section here in the web page where you see the arrows. They're all the same size, they're all aligned, they're going in the same direction. There's intentional alignment here, where you're looking at the same outcome. You've been very specific about measuring your data consistently, sharing the data, and you're working on continuous improvement across the board. Some programs, when they're working in this collaborative action, they've gotten to the point where they've defined very specifically what each different program is good at. So for example, Big Brothers Big Sisters might say, we're really good at the background checks, the screening of volunteers, and ensuring child safety. There may be another organization, maybe the MSU Extension, says, we're really good at partnering with community groups and other youth serving organizations to find out the students who are most in need of help, and designing ways that we can connect these great mentors with a variety of different activities and opportunities for youth engagement. And then maybe there's another organization, a partner that has the database that says, we'll collect the data, we can report it, we can create the dashboard, we can build it into our website. So then as partners, they all agree that if someone else is better at something than they are, they will step back and allow that organization to excel, and they each hit their prime area, so that as a whole, they've got the very best practices, the very best round of support services, and they're being efficient with their time and their resources. Now, moving to that kind of a framework takes a lot of humility, a lot of trust. You have to have engagement from the board, from your volunteers, sometimes from the founders of your organization. There's a lot of work to get to this, what they deem as the ultimate and ideal model. So it's something that if you're interested, you need to start the conversations now, but don't expect it's going to happen overnight. Amber and Phil and I were talking about this a little bit before the webinar started, that working within the funding community, this is a message I'm trying to take back to other foundations and other potential donors, that this isn't something you do in a year. Our annual grant making process does not really support or facilitate this type of work. And so we as a funding community need to look at how we can better partner with organizations. But this is really what we're talking about, is moving from this first stage of everyone's kind of doing nice things and hoping something sticks, through the process of collaboration and what would happen if we could ultimately align very well. Now, moving to this type of a structure, the very formal, closely aligned, sharing all this information, sharing financial resources is difficult. It's really hard for people who are doing it you know, at the grassroots, on the front lines level. We've got jobs to do. You have students to serve, you have organizations to coordinate, you have volunteers to manage. And oftentimes you don't have, at the program level, the community leverage or the board level leadership leverage to really convince people to make this happen. So you need someone in your community who can be an influential champion. A mayor, a superintendent, a key local business leader, someone who can go out and talk to people and convince them that changing their business model is important, and here's why. So you need to really have someone behind you. And this is something, again, that has come out of the articles and the research from Stanford and the Strive folks, that in the absence of the influential champion, it becomes very easy for people to go back to their own agendas. If no one is holding their feet to the proverbial fire, it's easy to walk away from this when it gets hard and when it gets messy. The second condition that you need to have is adequate financial resources. You do not save money in the beginning by doing collective impact. You need additional money to hire additional staff who can help in the coordination and the facilitation of this work. Unless one or two of you, I think I saw Molly Frendo was on the line today, and I think she's frequently just sitting around not doing anything. So she could coordinate this on behalf of everybody else. Yes, that was sarcasm, Molly, in the morning. But most of us don't have the time to go out and schedule extra meetings and make sure we're taking the minutes from the meetings and distributing them and keeping track of all the different work groups. And that's not our job, and we don't have the resources. So we need to make sure someone can be hired who has that leverage with the partners as well as the time to do this. And then the last thing is that there needs to be some sense of urgency to change the way you do your work. You know, as a community, you could say that even though we've got 5 local mentoring programs working at their full capacity, if we aggregated all of our waiting lists, there are still 300 kids not being served. That's an issue. That creates urgency for change. Or if we can say we've been running these same 20 programs among these 5 organizations addressing all these different neighborhoods and working with the scouts and working with the schools, and still we've got the same level of issues and at-risk behaviors with our youth. We've been working for all these years and nothing's different. That might be the urgency for change. But somebody has to identify that, and you have to get the partners to buy into it. Because if there's no reason to change the way you're doing business, again, it's going to be really easy to go back to the old way, and when it gets messy and it gets hard, just give it up. Phil, do you have anything to add at this point?
No, Rob, I think you're covering it really great, and just the idea that to having dedicated staff is really important to really make this work. I think that's one of the things we ran into as well.
Okay, thanks. And just for a little bit more background on why I'm kind of co-presenting this with Phil, last year, the Big Brothers Big Sisters Michigan Capital Region was the recipient of one of our Community Foundation's Impact Grant Awards. And that was a significant grant which would foster their expansion into 2 of our neighboring counties, moving beyond Ingham County and partnering with Clinton and Eaton County in Michigan. And they were already doing some work in those areas, but we really wanted to see more collaborative partnerships, more of or they wanted to see more collective impact across these counties. And so they were given a grant to start down this path. And so Phil will be sharing throughout the presentation what their experience has been over this past year, what their successes have been and what their challenges have been. And I think it's turned out to be a little bit messier and more challenging. We knew there would be speed bumps, but the reality of it is that things happen and it takes time to get people on board. So Phil can interject at any point in time.
Thank you.
So we just talked about the preconditions, the things you need to have before you even really start down this path if you want to be successful. What FSG Consulting, in analyzing a variety of collective impact initiatives across the country, they've identified 5 key conditions that lead to success. There are a lot of people that start down this path, and the ones that last and are now really seeing significant change, some, as I mentioned, 10 years into this, they've got these 5 key conditions. And these are points that you need to talk with your partners in your community and figure out how you get there. Some of these are very political. Some of these involve sharing the confidential data of your service recipients. So you have to work through systems and you have to work through agreements to ensure that you can deliver on these promises if you make them. And we'll run through these really quickly, and some of you may have already seen these from different workshops you've attended. But the first is the common agenda. In a few slides, we're going to look at, the next slide, we're going to go look at some models of this through Michigan, and Jackson County in particular is the common agenda that I look at. In the common agenda, you have to identify what is the shared vision of all these organizations. So someone has to get your partners in a room, and that's not just the program level staff, that's the board, that's key volunteers, and they have to agree on what is your vision for change. What are you all hoping to do differently and to accomplish as you're moving forward? You have to define what is the problem and really what are the underlying conditions of the problem, and then come to your joint agreement on how you're going to approach this change. This is not a half-day retreat. This is an ongoing process of communication. In some communities, it takes up to a year to arrive just at the common agenda. And until you have the common agenda in place, you don't move ahead with the joint programming, because the common agenda is what should drive your initiative. The second piece you need is a shared measurement system. And I have to really emphasize, when we're talking shared measurement, we're talking consistent measurement. My most recent experience with collective impact has been working with our local college access network, and they were looking at trying to coordinate data among a variety of different high schools. What are graduation rates? What are they talking about with, you know, college application completion rates and FAFSA rates? And what they found was that with some of I think it was the college application completion rate, not all of our school districts were measuring that the same. Some were taking a student at their word. Have you completed 3 college applications? Yes. Okay, we'll check you off. Other schools wanted to see an actual hard copy, so they had to print it off. Yet another school was only counting it if they had an actual confirmation from the college or university that yes, an application has been received. So they were all saying that they were talking about college application completion, but it was not a consistent baseline from which they were starting. So the dashboard was off because it wasn't consistent. This may be tricky for your programs, your local community partners that you'll be looking with, because sometimes measurement and data collection is hard and the cost and the process can be prohibitive. So if you've got a grassroots community organization that's really been working on just good fellowship and word of honor and those kind of things, their measurement and their data will look very differently than some organization that's been working with a more formalized system. And before you can move to collective impact, you have to ensure that all partners are willing to either loosen up their processes if they need to or ramp them up, either way. But it's something that's really important across the board. The third piece is something that we've touched on just a little bit already, is this notion of mutually reinforcing activities. We have to think about what different programs and activities do each of the programs offer, and how can we assure that they are reinforcing our collective work and not creating competition or confusion within the community. So what do some organizations need to ramp up? What do they need to step away from? Is there a way, for example, if we're looking at mentoring in our community from K through 12, if we've got a program that's focused on elementary age mentoring, is there a way that they can intentionally then kind of hand those kids off to the next level if there's a really good program at middle school or at high school or a community group? But instead of just hoping that these students and their families find the next best thing, can we create a system where we're reinforcing each other by saying, we've worked with the child in this area and now they need your services, and we're going to make sure there's a formal connection there. The fourth piece is this notion of continuous communication, and this really goes beyond a monthly newsletter. There has to be some method by which all the partners within your collective impact initiative can keep each other up to date on their progress, the barriers, the problems, new ideas or opportunities that emerge, things they've decided not to do. So somebody needs to be in touch with these organizations and kind of serve as the hub of communication. This is where we'll get into the backbone organization in a second, or where I talked about needing the financial resources to hire somebody that can coordinate these things. Somebody has to be in touch with everybody and make sure the right information is getting shared among the players. So that's the internal piece of communication. You also have to have the external communication where the community knows what you're doing. Because if your organization all of a sudden changes its business model, you want your volunteers and your funders to understand why. So someone needs to be very clear about that. I think, for example, Winning Futures is an example of an organization that I've seen very strong communication from. I see they have a real strong presence on Facebook, get email newsletters. I know Chris Marshall is all over the place doing presentations and being partners in different organizations and community meetings. Somebody has to be telling the story of what you're doing and what you're accomplishing, because as you change your work, and as Phil mentioned earlier, if it's going to take a little while for you to really achieve some great impact that you can throw on the front page of the paper, people need to see that things are happening and that this is for the benefit of the community as a whole. That's hard. If one organization is not communicating, that could affect the work of the rest of the partners. So somebody has to be on top of that, and there has to be this accountability throughout where every partner feels like they are committed to this. They're not just along for the ride because maybe there will be some money in the end. The fifth condition for collective impact is what really separates the capital C, capital I framework, the formalized framework, from other collaborations, other partnership initiatives in which you would have been involved. The backbone organization is the group that manages all of this. They make sure that there are progress toward goals. They make sure that data is being turned in as all partners agree to, whether it's quarterly, monthly, whatever framework it's being used. They help to communicate with the community, your shared calendar of activities, communicate with the different program partners, what's going on. They might manage grants, they might allocate grants. Typically, the backbone organization does not offer any programs. They're not running a mentoring program. It could be an additional staff that's hired into a mentoring organization, but their job is solely the coordination of this system. It's managing this stuff. That is difficult because that falls into this whole realm of administrative or overhead costs that a lot of funders aren't excited about funding. It baffles me, but I know that's the trend within the funding network. So finding a funder, whether it's a foundation, if it's a local business, if it's the Chamber of Commerce, whoever it might be that understands the need for this coordination and they can invest with you over time, not in a 1-year grant, but in a 5-year grant, maybe a 10-year commitment based on your accomplishment at certain benchmarks. This backbone organization is really what takes these organizations to the next level of being around for 10 years and really being able to measure that change. I want to look really quickly just at a couple of national examples. I'm being cognizant of time and wanting to get through these slides quickly so that we can talk at the end. But there are 3 programs that I just want you to look at quickly. One is the Roadmap Project, which is based in Seattle, Washington, and it serves neighboring counties as well. Their project goal is very simple. They want to double the number of students who are on track to graduate from college or earn a career credential by 2020. So they're focused on a single goal. They want to double that number of students. They have a lot of partners engaged. I love their website. It's vibrant and brings you in. They have a number of partners that are engaged in this initiative. You can look at their data center. You can see very specifically how they're measuring success, all their project reports, all that. They talk about what their collective action, their project hub is. These you'll see in this drop-down menu over here. This is the wide array of different programs and projects in the community who have unified around this one project goal. So you'll see it's not just all your typical college access or typical education. There are a lot of community groups in there. There are data groups. So as you're looking at the potential of collective impact locally, think broadly about the partners that you may be able to engage and who really cares about the work that you're doing. How do I get back to? Then we have 2 models here in Michigan that we've been looking at. The Learning Network in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I'm not sure if the folks who are here from outstate have heard about the Kalamazoo Promise, but that was the first real big Promise initiative in the state of Michigan, where it was guaranteed that any student who graduated from Kalamazoo Public Schools would have money to get a 4-year education. They would have guaranteed tuition, so their student need would be met. Out of that promise that was made by some anonymous donors came this conversation of, all right, so this is great, the kids can get to college, but how do we ensure that we're successful? They're successful when they get there. They want them ready for college, because we hear quite a bit how students get to college and then they drop out, sorry about this, because they're just not ready for the culture. They spend too much time remediation, they don't understand how to navigate the systems, there are all these different issues. So the Learning Network has put together this community initiative to make sure that the students are ready for college at the time that they're able to leverage their dollars. So you can, again, look here at their website. They talk about their structure. They define what community transformation is. And then they have their community scorecard, where they tell you exactly what they're measuring in all these different levels. And you can go in and look at the data sets there. Many of these broader collective impact initiatives that we've been looking at measure impact in multiple areas. They don't just focus in on one measurement, but they look at across the board. If all these partners align, are we looking at, third grade reading levels? Are we looking at sixth grade math levels? Are we looking at truancy levels? Are we looking at social behaviors? So they measure a variety of data points to be able to move forward and evaluate. So you would need to look at your local partners to see what data has already been collected, or what would they like to measure, what's their dream, and how can you get there. One of the things that we'll talk about with evaluation is that you can't measure everything. And sometimes we feel like we have to track every single data point. And I think it's important to remember you need to look at, in the short and long term, what can you measure consistently and effectively, and what are some anecdotal things that you hope will happen. It would be nice to tell the story, but you just can't do it all. So really looking at 5 measures, 7 max. I've seen some of the communities tackle 7 to 10, which I think is difficult, but those are the broader community initiatives with more partners and more money for that backbone work. The newest collective impact model that we've been looking at in Michigan is the Jackson County Cradle to Career. They talked about this for 5 years in their community with various partners before they ever got to this point. It started with their local college access network really wanting to do more and working with different partners, and it evolved to this full cradle to career model. So they're looking at early childhood 0 to 5 outcomes all the way through post-secondary to whether folks are career ready, what the local economy looks like, what's their local unemployment rate. So they have established something I mentioned earlier, the community agenda, and I just wanted to show you this as a link quickly. They've defined right in a 2-page community agenda that urgency for change statement that we talked about. They've clarified the purpose of what this group will be, and they have an executive committee or a leadership team that oversees it. They've identified 4 very specific goals that all the partners are committed to working around. The ultimate 60% goal. They've talked about some of their objectives, all the metrics they're going to measure. They wrote all of this out, talked about the expectation for community engagement, and then if you'll look here, I'm going to try not to make you dizzy, there are about 20 different partners, you can't see the whole page on my screen, who've signed on to this agenda. So these folks were all involved in the development of the agenda, or they had key staff members involved. You've got Jackson County commissioners, you've got representatives of Higher Education Alliance, you've got Enterprise Group, which is a business roundtable, College Access Center, City, Manufacturer Association, Community Foundation. So they've got a number of different partners. And the final document, this is all signed now. They had a big community splash where all these folks came. They did a media release. They had news there, and made it a big deal that their community was committed to changing the way they do business and working with students. This is something you could do within your local mentoring initiatives, whether it was within a defined city or county, if it was a regional approach. This is something that would garner attention of the business community and funders. If you could say a number of our programs have come together and we've been able to identify shared goals and processes and we're moving forward. So quickly, I don't want to spend too much time in these websites. You can go back and explore them more later. Also, if you go to the FSG site, you can see links to a number of different collective impact models across the country that are working in different type of sectors. You may happen to be on the board of a local environmental organization or something. There are examples of all different types of projects listed in the FSG website. All right, I'm not seeing any questions yet, so I'm just going to keep talking until someone stops me. Now I'd like to switch gears a little bit out of that very formal collective impact, capital C, capital I framework, into some of the work that our communities have been dabbling in and attempting and being somewhat successful in for years. And that's the lowercase collective impact, which sometimes we call collaboration, we call strategic partnership, strategic alignment. There are a lot of different terms, but it's not nearly as formally defined as the framework put out by FSG. When we look at success in any of these initiatives, again, there are really 5 key areas that drive the more effective, more grassroots, somewhat informal collaboration and strategic partnerships locally. We're going to talk about those. The first is your self-assessment, defining the common vision, the open communication, building of trust among partners, and measuring results. Now, I will say that these are not in any particular order. As with all of life, they ebb and flow, and depending on where you start and where new partners come in, you might have to jump back and revisit some of these issues at different points in time. In the literature that I found, build trust is listed 4th in the list. I would say that if you don't have trust up front, you're not going to achieve a common vision, and you're certainly not going to accomplish open communication if people don't trust each other. So that is something these are not linear. This is just considerations within kind of a circle of considerations for you to look at. When we look at the common vision, and you'll see that several of these, the self-assessment, several of these points that we've talked about really overlap some of the more formal framework. And again, this less formal, the lower C, lower I model, this is what we've been doing for years. This has been kind of an aspiration since I started working in nonprofits 20 years ago. We all talk about wanting to do work better, that the days of the turf wars are over. Funders want to see you collaborative. They ask that in all the grant applications. Who are your partners? How are you working together? This is something we've been working toward. But a lot of us come at it because we're supposed to, as opposed to because we want to. Because again, sometimes this makes our lives more difficult. But if you know the process, and if you can begin working some of these steps within your organization before you go out and engage partners, before you try to attract a new funder, you'll be more suited for success in the future. So this really starts with self-assessment and being aware of having the humility and the confidence to be able to say very clearly what your organization does well. What gaps do you have that you're hoping will be filled in this partnership? You have to have really in-depth conversations about ownership and control and the whole identity. A lot of organizations spend a lot of time on a branding campaign, and they want their brand to be known. Sometimes as you move into partnerships, you lose credit for things. Someone else might get their name in the paper and not your organization, and you need to make sure you're okay with that. It's ultimately about the goal you're trying to achieve in the community as opposed to promoting your organization. So you have to go through all these turf and trust issues. But the real question at the beginning of this is this final bullet point here. Is your organization functioning effectively enough, well enough to withstand the pressure of collaboration? When people start asking questions and opening the cupboard doors and seeing how you really work, are you ready for that kind of scrutiny and that kind of visibility with your partners? So it takes, again, a lot of humility, a lot of confidence for you to be able to say, we have room to learn, and we have things that we do well, and we have areas we'd like to grow, but you need to define those things up front. At one point in time, I was working with organizations that were looking at merging. And one of the cardinal rules of mergers, I think, is also a cardinal rule of partnerships, and that is that 2 weak organizations don't make a strong one. So if you've got 2 organizations or 2 programs locally that are really flailing and really stumbling, bringing those 2 struggling organizations together will not make a strong collaboration. So you need to be aware of what are your strengths and what are your challenges moving forward. Once you've gone through that self-assessment and you begin to think about what some of your partnerships might look like, you have to think about what really is our common vision, because this is not about advancing the goals of any one organization. This is about the community need, however you define that. It's about a particular group of youth or one particular area of your community that's not been served. whatever your common vision is. And you have to get all the partners to agree to that vision. Because if one group comes in, I'm going to use Phil as my scapegoat here. If Big Brothers Big Sisters were to walk in and say, if you are going to partner with us, you have to do things exactly our way and buy into our vision, that's going to create some barriers with partners. Instead, what Phil does in working with other partners is to bring them to the table and say, here's what we do really well. Here's our vision for the community. We'd like you to partner. Here's what we think you can bring to the table. So first of all, are you willing to share your systems with us? Second of all, can we really hone in this vision in a way that it makes sense for all of us, that all of our boards can buy into, our volunteers, our funders, and our staff? That takes, again, a series of conversations. This doesn't always happen in a half-day retreat. It's nice to think we can go and get through the wordsmithing, but this evolves over time. It's really important to listen as you're developing this common vision. I always like to get right to the crux of things and ask, what are your non-negotiables? If you're bringing partners to the table, it's great to be aspirational and visionary, but if someone's got some card tucked up their sleeve that says, well, this will all be fine, except, we need to know that up front before we waste a bunch of time walking down a path that we're really never going to be able to follow. Once you've got that common vision, if you can really move in this direction, developing shared principles that will guide your organization. How do you communicate? How will you manage finances? How will you treat staff? How will you treat volunteers? How will you approach funders? These are all important to the long-term success of your partnership. And then I will emphasize over and over again, as you come to these agreements, write it down and get people's signatures for clarity and understanding up front, as well as to manage transition as you move forward. You know, if Lisa Bottomley is really excited about a program and then she moves on to a new job, how are we sure that it was an organizational commitment as opposed to Lisa's personal passion? So we need to really make sure that we've got these kind of things documented moving forward. This really adds to the sustainability and the success of these models. The open communication we talked about quite a bit previously, but it comes down really to that common language, making sure you're all speaking the same language, you're measuring the same data, you're communicating with your constituents in the same way, talking about how your process for decision making, who's in charge, how will you communicate, all these things that get really glitchy is important to try to talk with folks about and have a system. If you hit a barrier, how do you manage that? How do you mediate your conflicts, and who makes the final decision? The fourth component of this is really building trust. Again, this should happen before you actually get there, because if you don't trust people, you're not going to be vulnerable with them, and this is important. You have to respect the differences of the programs. I know sometimes what we've seen in the capital region is that a lot of times there are cultural differences within organizations. We see faith-based mentoring programs that just want to trust everybody and allow anybody who says they want to be a mentor to come in, and someone may have a prison record, but from our perspective within our faith community, they've changed their behavior. We want to give them a second chance. We've got other programs that are very strict on their child safety standards that say, nope, if you've got a prison record, I'm really sorry, it's too much risk. We'll find some other way for you to volunteer in the community. That's not just about policy, that's about culture within organization, and it's about different philosophies of volunteer and community engagement. So you have to be able to manage through those differences and respect the differences and come to some common agreement. And if you can't come to common agreement, then a lot of times it's better just to say, we're going to agree that we are not appropriate partners in this level. We're going to continue to do our work. We're not going to try to undermine each other. But when our funders say, why aren't you partnering, we can very, very clearly distinguish that and explain it to them because we've had the honest conversation. Sometimes this gets tricky, so you might need to bring in a consultant or an outside facilitator. But when you're building this level of trust with your partners, the other piece that sometimes gets in the way is this issue of money. in the bigger organization with more money sometimes is perceived as the boss or in control or more important. That's not good for partnership. So you need to really recognize what every organization brings to the table. They're contributing something. So it might not be money all the time, but it might be recognition, it might be access to new communities, and make sure that all partners are publicly recognized. If someone feels like they're just in the background all the time, eventually they're going to walk away and your program might suffer. So that's important up front to build that trust based on the authentic value of every partner. And then finally, again, this keeps coming up throughout years and years of partnership. You will hear some of the partners say, well, this doesn't really align with our mission, or this is not what our funders want, within my organization. What you have to get beyond is the needs and the wants of the individual organization and move to the collective community our. And if the partners aren't able to do that, you need to define why, and again, go back to see if they're real strong partners to continue with. Measuring results, we've talked about this. One of the things we fail to do often when we're evaluating our programs is really celebrate when we hit benchmarks and when we get results. We do our evaluation because our funder requires it, and then we put the evaluation report in the drawer. Or we might share it with our partners, but we don't really tell anybody else. So being able to celebrate the benchmarks, really promote success, is important in the community. Again, as Phil mentioned, you might not have a significant number of new students involved in mentoring for a couple of years, but you might be able to get a great news story out of the fact that you've now got 3 organizations who are partnering and doing joint volunteer recruitment efforts throughout the community, or sharing funding, or whatever it might be. So think about what can you tell your community, how can you celebrate. The humility piece of this aspect and the inside is really learning from your mistakes. As you go through this process, things are going to mess up. You're going to make assumptions about your community or your partners that you will find out not to be true, and it will affect your work. You need to discuss that openly and honestly so that you're not making the same mistake over and over. You also need to document that history, so 10 years down the road, if you've moved on to a new project or opportunity in your own life, the people who come after you won't keep recreating the same mistake. So learn and document those processes. We've seen some significant barriers as folks come in. There's a lot of lip service to collaboration and a lot of lip service to collective impact. And we really have to get down to, are people genuinely committed to this, and are they able to set aside some of these old practices that our nonprofits and community agencies have had for years. This whole issue of turf, that this is my neighborhood, this is my program, this is my community. We have to set that aside and focus on the larger organization. Any partner who's coming to the table because of grant money as opposed to mission alignment is really going to get in your way. We talked about trust. Trying to do this in a vacuum and not engaging your external constituencies, your other partners, not talking to the schools, not talking to the parents, not talking to your funders or the business community, other people who might care. Get their input, get their buy-in early on, so that as you run into these speed bumps and the stumbling blocks, you've got people there to support you. Sometimes we confuse the community with our different pieces here, the different identities. We have to be really clear with them and get past the lingo. Sometimes organizations, again, have a resistance to letting go or unrealistic expectations. All of these things have to be managed. So as you're looking at your partners, I'm not going to read all these bullet statements, but this is a list of questions that I would encourage you to sit down within your partnership or within your organization in the beginning to really define what your hopes and expectations are and to assess if this is going to be a good fit. Don't assume anything. Be able to answer these questions, look at the trust issues, look at the management issues, sit down with your work team and go through this list and see if you can even have this conversation. If you can't open these questions now, then chances are good you're going to have issues as you move forward. And this comes down to really the who's the boss issue. Who's going to be in charge? Who's going to manage this? Is it one organization? Are you hiring someone different? Will different partners have different roles in managing? If so, how do you ensure the accountability? One of the issues is who talks to the partner that's not pulling their share of the weight. They're not getting their data in, they're not getting their financial reports in, and their inability to communicate may be affecting the credibility of the whole. So somebody has to manage those things, and that's where it gets really messy too. Again, get it in writing. I will say that all the time, get it in writing. So now we're going to open it up for questions and conversation if we can unmute folks. And I would really like Phil to help with this conversation as far as what he's learned and his initiatives over the last year and a half or so, and talk about where does this fit within the whole landscape of mentoring. So can we unmute people, Amber?
Sorry, Robin, I was muted myself. If people go ahead and raise their hand, we can unmute you individually, would probably be easiest. We do have a question in the question box, Robin, from Molly Frendo, and her question was, do you have any suggestions for what you should do to clean house before you're approaching collaboration?
Look in. Sometimes you have to look internally to see is your organization strong enough to clean house, and who is getting in the way. I've been dealing with managing staff and partnerships for a long time, and as much as you can do to depersonalize the conversations, and I'm sure you know this, if you can come back to any of the pieces outlined in the framework that we need to be able to communicate openly with our partners, and if there's someone who's clearly not able to do that, somebody has to make an assessment, and it might not necessarily be cleaning house, but it might be choosing which of your team members actually are engaged in the partnership and which are not. This is where, again, another great example of where this whole process is really messy, because a lot of these frameworks are designed in the ideal world, and then you get to deal with the real life boots on the ground kind of stuff of, do we have the right people in the right seats to be able to move this forward? So the only advice or insight I have that way is to look at who is the decision maker in this regard, and do they have the information they need, and are they committed to be able to do it? Because again, bringing an organization to the table with reluctant partners is not going to advance the cause.
Right. I've been chatting with some of our participants as well as you were talking, because some of what you were saying was really resonating for those of us that have been involved in local mentoring collaboratives across the state. And while those have been less formal than this collective impact model that you've been talking about, there's a lot of overlap in some of the successes and challenges that folks have experienced. And we have a number of people on the line from MSU extension organizations, and they tend to provide a leadership role in some of the local mentoring collaboratives that have happened across the state. And over the years, we've seen some really strong collaborations in Ottawa County, Kent County, and in Southeast Michigan. But we've seen some struggles in a few areas. One, on one of your previous slides, you talked about accountability. And I think we've really struggled with, or we've seen a lot of our collaboratives really struggle with, accountability. Do we want to be really inclusive and invite everybody to the table? Or do we want to limit the number of people that are at the table and be really focused and intentional and hold people accountable to a common agenda? And we've seen the strength of these collaboratives kind of come and go over the years, and a lot of it has been due to relationships. So like you had mentioned, ensuring that the relationship is with the organization as a whole and not just with an individual. So we've certainly seen some of the strength of our organizations kind of come and go based on that. And then also, as some of our mentoring programs have experienced funding challenges as well and capacity issues, leadership within mentoring organizations at times have not felt like having their staff devote time to a local collaborative effort is valuable enough, and have made some of their staff members step back from being engaged in some of those local collaboratives. So, do you have any comments on that or suggestions to those folks on the line that are trying to lead some of those local collaborations?
Yeah, one of my favorite um, learnings, I think, out of all of this work that's being done is that the most successful collective impact initiatives are really those that are designed as a coalition of the willing. It's designed more on quality than quantity. So you have to identify who are the partners that can come to the table sharing these same commitments, the same values, and build on your success. Because really trying to drag along 5 or 6 organizations who are only half-hearted, that really just slows down the impact of the whole. I'm kind of a tough love person when it comes to accountability. We've got our benchmarks, we've got our goals, we've got our guidelines that you all agreed to, and if you can't meet it, then you're out. That's just it, because this is not about, I'm going to jump over to a different topic in the whole concept of nonprofit stewardship, and if any of you have read Peter Brinkerhoff's books or attended any of his trainings, we have to run our programs and our organizations like businesses. We have a goal, and our goal is to create impact within our community. So we have to make business decisions based on our ability to meet that goal. And if there are partnerships that are getting in the way of our service delivery, we need to terminate those partnerships. It's not about the people. The difficulty is that people take it personally. Organizations will take it personally if you say, we're really sorry, but you're no longer a member of our club. But if you've got this common goal, if you've got the common vision, and if you've got, again, that influential champion or some key leaders who can reinforce you and say, this isn't about the program staff liking each other or not liking each other. This is about our overall community commitment to this goal. And if you're not helping us, if you can't meet your commitment, then we can't continue. I think that the Strive Network down in Cincinnati actually is a really good example of this, because over 10 years, they've now established, there are, I want to say, close to 200 organizational partners that are part of the Strive Network in the greater Cincinnati area. It has now gotten to the point where they've grown into this number. They started small, and based on their success, they grew, because success attracts people. And what they have now is they have dozens of local funders who say to all of the folks trying to work around these educational impacts, the K-12 cradle to career stuff, if you're not part of the Strive Network, if you're not a member in good standing that is meeting the goals, you will not receive funding from us. So their credibility has been built over time, but in the beginning they had to make those very difficult decisions about which organizations are the appropriate partners to build our goals. And again, we're not saying that your program is bad. We're saying that your program does not meet the constructs and the commitments of this program, this partnership, and so therefore it's not a good fit. So it's difficult, and someone needs a real stiff backbone to make these decisions, but in the end, it's worth it, because if you want to create change, you have to do business differently, and that's hard.
Sure. One of the other things that came up as you were going through your slides, and maybe Phil can speak to this as well, through the local mentoring collaboratives that we've seen, they've primarily been collaborating with other mentoring programs. So, for example, mentoring programs will come together and train mentors together, or host match activities together, or provide professional development opportunities for mentoring program staff in a particular region. What we haven't really seen is these collaboratives opening the doors to other youth serving organizations or other organizations that they may all have a common agenda. So could you speak to, who you should be considering as potential partners? Or Phil, could you speak to some of your experience in collaborating with other organizations that are not specifically mentoring programs?
Yeah, I'm going to throw out just one kind of not even pithy, but short comment, and then I'm going to let Phil talk about his local partnerships. When you're looking at who your partners could or should be, I think the question really comes down to who cares. Ultimately, who will be impacted by your positive results, and how do you engage them, either in helping design a new delivery system, in helping reach new audiences, or attract new funders. So that's a very local discussion to have when you look at your local assets and potential partners. But I think you're right, Amber, it really needs to get beyond just your traditional organizations. Phil, you want to talk about your experience a little bit?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Just a couple of comments on some of the things that you both have addressed here just recently, and then I'll just dive into what we did and then what we learned. The first off, I would think that the collaborative that starts with a lead organization that initiates and then builds the partnerships intentionally also will help solve the accountability problem. And then along the idea about should we include everybody or not, I think you answered that really well, Rob. But you think of it like this, that it's the law of the chain. In that respect, that the chain's only as strong as the weakest link. So if you can really be specific about who you want to partner with you, then it's just going to make your effort that much stronger. So what we did was we found 3 other mentoring organizations that do mentoring different than what Big Brothers Big Sisters does. We do one-to-one. We looked for groups that did group, after school, and we went to them. We brought them to the table, and we essentially said this: we don't want anybody to have to invent anything new, because we want to work off everybody's strengths. And we were very intentional about who we recruited, and it was so well received that everybody was like, oh, wow, if we don't even get funding for this, we should still find a way to do this. It was such a good idea. And so we began to put the partnerships together, and we created different MOUs for each partner. Big Brothers Big Sisters Michigan Capital Region served as the primary. We had the 6 things that we were going to do in the partnership with this group in one county, and 6 different things we were going to do with the other group in another county, and so forth. They had the 6 or 7 things they were going to do for us. So a lot of what Robin has really described today, we went through, and it was a tremendous help. To be honest, some of the things we didn't do. We didn't probably evaluate our partners and their ability to produce as well as we should have. We let their enthusiasm to be a part of the process kind of just wash right through that step. And as a result, we kind of ended up paying the price for it, because we did receive the grant to create mentoring partnerships across 3 counties, and basically what we wanted one mentoring group to do, they had after-school youth development. We wanted to make sure that the new matches we created had access to those after-school activities and programs. So we were going to increase that mentoring organization's capacity, so we gave them funding, part of the funding that we received, to cover their cost and make sure that this partnership wasn't going to be a liability to them. And in return, what we asked them to do was not only to allow the match to be able to participate in their program, but they would also help do mentor recruitment, and then referrals for those 25 matches in their county. And the roadblock we came into is that we were actually asking people to do things they had never done before. We asked them to help do mentor recruitment in a specific area, and they had never solicited volunteers in that fashion, and it proved that they weren't very good at it when they started. And so that has been something we've learned, that when you're going to partner with someone, we want to make sure that I guess the best indicator of future success is past performance. While we wanted them to work in their strengths, we did ask them to do something they had not done before, and they really weren't able to deliver on that, on those ideas and objectives. So that set the program back as well. The other thing was and you discussed this, which was the transition in leadership. And I noticed in the Jackson Cradle to Career, not only did they have the person's signature line, Bob Smith or Susan Smith or whoever, they had their title. So to me, it was as if the organization and the person was committing to this. Well, what we ended up with was one of our partners was a significant transition in leadership. And so I, even as late as last week, sat down with the new leadership and said, here's the MOU, here's what you agreed to do. And they were like, we're clueless about this. And the new leadership said, I would have never signed this MOU to help recruit mentors or volunteers for Big Brothers Big Sisters. I can't even get enough volunteers to do my own program. So it was definitely a learning experience. But I want to say that as many pitfalls as Robin has described and a process that she's outlined, this is from Big Brothers Big Sisters, who doesn't have a great reputation of playing well in the sandbox. So let me just go on record to say, Amber, that I absolutely believe in this collaborative effort in order to reach collective impact. I do believe in the end result, because I think the children that we're serving will be better. They will have a better chance in life if they're able to take advantage of the one-to-one mentoring that we offer, and the group mentoring or small group mentoring or the youth development activities that others provide. That if we're working together to impact the life of that child, I can't see how that's ever a lose situation. And so even though there's a lot of trouble and there's some pitfalls, and I think Robin has outlined a great process to avoid some of those, I absolutely believe in the end result, and we're not going to stop trying to make this work on our end.
Thank you, Phil. I think that is a great way to wrap up today's webinar. I think remembering why we're all engaged in this work and what the end outcome is, which is improving the lives of the kids that we're all trying to serve. That's a very important message, and I think really at the heart of what we've been trying to discuss today around why collective impact is important. We are a little bit beyond our 1 hour time frame, so I don't see any further questions. Phil or Robin, do you have any additional comments that you'd like to share to wrap up today's webinar?
I just really want to thank everyone for their efforts in this area. Your work is so important, and I know that from my experience in the field, you're constantly thrown every 3 years there's a new flavor of the week of some new framework, some new evaluation model. But it really comes back to your organization and your local community goals, and take what you can from this presentation and work with it, but don't feel like you have to do everything all at once. It's a constant evolution and a growth process. Get a hold of Mentor Michigan when you have more questions. I'm happy to answer questions, but I want to thank Phil for his honesty and his humility in sharing what their experiences have been, and just really wish you all the best with your work.
Thank you. And Robin and Phil, I really appreciate both of your comments and your time today in doing this presentation. And am excited to see where this conversation goes. I know 1 hour was just not enough time to really dive into this topic, but I think it's a fantastic start. So for those of you on the line today, I'll be following up with you via email and sending you along the articles that Robin referred to at the very beginning of her presentation in order for you to learn a bit more about this topic. And then we'll also include our contact information in that email as well, so we can continue the dialogue with you via email or set up a future time to talk as well. So Robin and Phil, thanks again, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. That concludes today's webinar.
Thanks, Amber.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.